The first time it happened, they almost thought it was a trick of the light. Every morning, just as the sun began to lift over the horizon, the wild stallion appeared, racing across the open fields toward the fence that ran along the edge of the ranch. Its mane streamed behind it like a dark river, hooves pounding the dry earth with a rhythm that echoed across the hills. It wasn't unusual to see wild horses on the range, but there was something about this one something in the way it moved, in the sharp intelligence in its eyes, that made the ranchers pause. The stallion didn't wander. It didn't graze or slow to sniff the morning air. It ran straight to the fence, stopped and stared, every morning like clockwork. The first time they saw what had drawn the stallion there, it nearly knocked the wind out of them. Across the fence, in a small clearing near the creek, something stirred. At first it looked like nothing more than a shadow, a trick of the light in the early sun. But as the ranchers edged closer, they realized it was far more. A young foal, barely able to stand, was struggling against the morning chill, its coat matted and dirty. It shivered under the frost and the wind, trembling in ways that made the heart ache. The stallion didn't just notice, it seemed to care. Its ears twitched forward, muscles coiled, eyes locked on the foal with a fierce protectiveness that stunned the observers. No one had ever seen a wild stallion act like that. The rancher who had first spotted the scene stood frozen, hand resting on the wooden rail of the fence. He had lived on this land for decades, seen droughts, storms, and more struggling livestock than he could count, but there was a raw honesty in that moment he couldn't ignore. The wild stallion was something untamed and powerful, yet here it was, drawn to a vulnerable creature it could have ignored without a second thought. The rancher's eyes followed the stallion as it stepped closer to the foal, nudging it gently with its muzzle. The foal wobbled, nearly collapsing, and the stallion's low nicker was almost human in its urgency. It was a sound that carried warning, reassurance, and determination all at once. The rancher called to the others on the property. A few men and women came running, coats flapping in the cold wind, breath clouding in the crisp morning air. They stood silently at the fence, watching as the wild stallion circled the foal, nudging it, and guarding it from the scattered brush where other horses grazed. The air felt electric, like something sacred was taking place right in front of them. None of them had ever seen a wild horse exhibit such deliberate care. The sight was beautiful, and it was terrifying all at once. If the foal couldn't survive, there would be no stopping the grief that would follow. For days the routine continued. Every morning, as the first rays of light painted the fields gold, the stallion would appear, galloping to the fence with the foal somewhere nearby, trembling but alive. The ranchers began to take note of the patterns. The stallion didn't wander off to graze with the herd. It didn't race away into the hills after a few moments of attention. It stayed circling the foal, defending it from potential threats, and sometimes letting the foal nuzzle close to its chest, as if offering a fragile comfort. The ranchers whispered among themselves, questioning whether they should intervene. Could a wild stallion truly be trusted? Could the foal survive in the wild under its protection, or would human interference be necessary to save it? No one knew the full story. The stallion's origins were a mystery. No one in the county had reported losing a horse matching its description, and yet here it was, showing up daily at the same spot, committed to a task the ranchers could not understand. It moved like a shadow, sleek and strong, its muscles taut and ready, eyes alert for any sign of danger. The foal, in contrast, was fragile and uncertain, its legs wobbling under its tiny body, its coat roughened by exposure. Watching the two together, the ranchers realized they were witnessing a story of survival and instinct that ran deeper than any training or familiarity could explain. One morning, the rancher decided he could no longer simply watch. He approached slowly, careful not to startle the stallion, and knelt beside the foal. The animal flinched at his presence, trembling beneath the cold and fear, but it did not collapse. The stallion circled nervously, keeping just enough distance to make sure the rancher's intentions were clear. The rancher extended a hand, brushing the foal's coat gently, feeling the raw heat of life barely clinging to the small creature. He whispered softly, trying to communicate calm, and noticed for the first time the deep intelligence reflected in the stallion's eyes. It was assessing him, weighing whether the human could be trusted. The air was thick with tension, silent communication passing between the wild stallion and the rancher. Days turned into weeks, and the ranchers began leaving food near the fence line. The stallion would watch from a distance, its gaze unwavering until the foal approached the nourishment. Sometimes the foal stumbled, but the stallion's nudge was enough to steady it. The ranchers kept their distance, careful not to disrupt the bond forming between the two animals. They whispered theories among themselves, wondering if the stallion had lost a family, if the foal had been abandoned, or if it was part of some hidden herd they had never seen. The questions multiplied, yet no answers came. Only the steady, patient care of the wild stallion. The nights were long and cold. On more than one occasion, the rancher thought he heard the distant sound of the stallion calling to the hills, a low and mournful whinny that carried across the valley. The foal's shivering body would respond, ears twitching toward the sound, as though recognizing a memory it could not understand. The rancher shivered under the memory of the first morning, recalling the raw determination in the stallion's eyes, the small gestures of care that defied everything they thought they knew about wild horses. It was as though nature itself had intervened, placing this guardian in their path at the precise moment it was needed most. No one knew what would happen next. Would the foal survive the harsh nights and long days? Would the wild stallion remain by its side, protecting it through danger and uncertainty? The ranchers could only watch and wait, hearts full of worry and awe, drawn into a story that was far larger than themselves. Every morning brought the same ritual, yet each day was filled with new tension. The air seemed charged with possibility, and the ranchers felt the weight of the mystery pressing on them like the rising sun over the hills. One morning, the stallion ran to the fence with unusual urgency, hoofs kicking up clouds of dust that shimmered in the dawn. The ranchers rushed to see what had triggered the sudden energy, hearts racing. As they reached the clearing, they froze. The foal was standing stronger than ever before, but it was not alone. Something or someone was moving among the trees, shadowed and hidden, watching the pair. The stallion's ears flattened, muscles tensing like coiled steel, and it let out a sharp, commanding whinny that echoed across the fields. The foal trembled beside it, instinctively seeking the protection it had learned to trust. The ranchers exchanged anxious glances, unsure whether to intervene or wait. The presence in the trees was deliberate, cautious, and it carried an air of threat that made the hair rise on their arms. The wild stallion's eyes never left the clearing. It pawed the ground, its stance protective and unyielding. The ranchers felt the tension crackle in the air, a silent warning that the morning ritual had become something far more dangerous and urgent. Their curiosity, their wonder, now mingled with fear. They realized they were witnessing a moment that would define the foal's future, one that depended not just on strength, but on instinct, courage, and the unspoken bond between a wild stallion and a fragile young horse. And in that moment, as the sun fully broke over the ridge and cast golden light across the field, the ranchers knew that what they were about to see would change everything they thought they understood about life on the range. The days that followed the mysterious morning were unlike any the ranchers had ever experienced. The wild stallion continued its daily ritual, but now there was a new layer of tension that hung over the land. The presence in the trees, the shadow that had lingered near the clearing, had not disappeared. Every sunrise brought a sense of anticipation, the kind that made the skin tingle and the heart pound. The ranchers tried to carry on with their work, repairing fences and tending cattle, but their eyes constantly drifted toward the paddock and the hills beyond. The stallion's urgency seemed to intensify, its movements sharper, more deliberate. It was clear that something or someone was out there, watching, waiting, testing the bond between the wild horse and the fragile foal. The rancher who had first noticed the stallion's ritual began documenting the mornings, sketching the positions of the horses, noting the sounds and movements of the shadows beyond the trees. He remembered every detail, the way the stallion's ears twitched toward the ridge, the foal's cautious steps, the distant noises that no one else could explain. There was a rhythm to it, an order that suggested more than coincidence. He couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was a living thing, responding to the horse's presence and to the hidden observer in ways he could not fully understand. Neighbors began to take notice as well. Some whispered that the stallion was guarding the foal for reasons they could not imagine. Others suggested the shadow in the trees might be a predator, though no footprints or tracks supported that theory. Children came to watch from a distance, their voices hushed as if speaking too loudly might disturb the delicate balance. And yet, despite the growing crowd of observers, the stallion's focus never wavered. It ran each morning with the same intensity, stopping at the fence and turning its gaze toward the clearing, as if to ensure that the foal was safe before allowing itself to relax, even for a moment. One afternoon, the rancher decided to approach the clearing again, carefully, keeping the sun behind him to avoid startling the horses. The foal had grown stronger, its legs more steady, but it still lacked confidence. The stallion paced along the edge of the clearing, watching the foal, ears pinned occasionally toward the ridge where the shadow had appeared. The rancher stepped slowly, hands visible, speaking softly to the horses in low tones. The stallion's gaze followed him, measuring his intent, but it did not retreat. Its muscles remained coiled, ready to defend, yet its trust seemed to expand just enough to allow the rancher closer. When the foal took a tentative step toward him, he extended a hand, letting it sniff and explore cautiously. The bond between human and horse, while still tentative, was growing, nurtured by patience and respect. The stallion's behavior puzzled the rancher. It was intelligent, yes, but its actions suggested memory, strategy, and deep instinct. It reacted not only to immediate danger but to distant possibilities, anticipating threats that could not yet be seen. The rancher began to wonder what experiences had shaped the wild horse. Had it once been part of a larger herd with a foal of its own? Had it survived attacks, storms, or hunger? Each day he watched it, the stallion seemed to tell a story without words, a narrative of survival and courage that had carried it to this clearing at precisely the moment when the foal needed protection. At dusk, the rancher sometimes saw the shadow move among the trees again, slipping closer with a patient silence. It was not a predator exactly, but it carried the aura of mystery, a human presence that had not yet revealed its intentions. The stallion's ears twitched toward it, nostrils flaring as it tested the air. The rancher felt tension coil around his chest like a rope, the kind that warned him of things beyond sight and understanding. He could see the foal shivering slightly, and he stepped closer to ensure it was not frightened, yet he knew that the true challenge lay ahead. The shadow would not remain forever, and the connection between the stallion and foal would soon be tested in ways that would define the future of the clearing, the horses, and everyone who watched. The nights were restless. The rancher could not sleep, imagining scenarios where the foal might stumble, where the stallion's vigilance might be tested beyond endurance. He thought of all the lessons he had learned in years on the range, lessons about patience, about understanding, about reading the land, and yet none prepared him for the complexity of the bond before him. The stallion's eyes, always sharp, seemed to see not only the physical dangers but the intentions of the shadow in the trees. It was as if the animal had knowledge of the world that went beyond instinct, beyond memory. The rancher began to suspect that the stallion carried not only skill, but a hidden wisdom, a gift that allowed it to protect and guide in ways humans could barely comprehend. Neighbors began speculating about the shadow. Some thought it might be a horse thief, observing the animals for weakness. Others believed it was a wild animal, perhaps a mountain lion or a coyote, testing the horses. Still, the rancher noticed that no tracks followed the shadow, no disturbance of soil betrayed its passage. It was deliberate, careful, and unnervingly patient. The stallion, however, seemed unafraid. Its vigilance had grown into a quiet confidence. When the rancher approached, it allowed him near the foal, signaling that together they could face the mystery at the edge of the clearing. One morning, after weeks of observing the same routine, the rancher noticed something different. The stallion ran faster than usual, nostrils flaring, muscles rippling under the early sun. The foal followed, wobbling but determined, yet there was a new intensity in the air. The shadow moved closer to the clearing, no longer just observing from afar. The rancher's pulse quickened. He sensed a confrontation approaching, though he could not yet see its form. The stallion's mane streamed behind it like black fire, ears flattened, hooves striking the ground with thunderous rhythm. The foal stumbled, and the stallion nudged it with urgency, forcing it to find its footing. The rancher ran to the fence, heart pounding, wondering if the bond they had watched for weeks would be enough to withstand what was coming. He could feel the tension stretching across the clearing, the shadow approaching, and the stallion reacting not out of fear, but out of a deep, instinctive understanding. The foal, fragile and young, leaned into the stallion's guidance, trusting in a connection it did not yet fully comprehend. And the rancher realized that he too was learning from them, discovering patience, courage, and the power of instinct-driven loyalty. The wind shifted, carrying scents and sounds from the ridge. The shadow paused, deliberate, testing the perimeter, almost as if it could sense the stallion's protective presence. The rancher felt the hairs on his arms rise. Every instinct told him to act, to intervene, but he knew the stallion had already prepared the foal for what might come. They were in the midst of a story unfolding in real time, one that would test courage, trust, and the strength of bonds forged in silence and motion. As the sun climbed higher, casting long rays across the clearing, the rancher noticed the foal standing taller, legs firmer beneath its small body. The stallion paced in measured circles, hooves kicking dust, eyes locked on the shadow, muscles tense like coiled steel. The rancher understood something he hadn't before. The bond between these two animals was more than instinct. It was strategy, loyalty, and a quiet determination that could not be broken by fear or uncertainty. The clearing had become a stage for a lesson in courage, one that the rancher could watch but not yet influence. And then, as the shadow moved closer, the rancher felt the air change, electric with anticipation. The foal trembled slightly but did not retreat. The stallion lowered its head, ears flat, nostrils flaring. It let out a low whinny that carried across the clearing like a warning. The rancher held his breath, knowing that what would happen in the next moments could change everything. The stallion had guided them this far, the foal had learned to trust, and the shadow had revealed itself as something more than a mystery. Every heart in the ranch, human and animal alike, waited for the next move. The clearing, once peaceful in the morning light, now hummed with tension. The rancher realized that the story they had watched unfold for weeks, the wild stallion, the fragile foal, the unseen observer, was reaching a critical turning point. And as he leaned closer to the fence, straining to see what was coming, he knew that the answer to the mystery, the lesson of courage and trust, and the destiny of the foal and the stallion were about to be revealed. The wind carried a faint sound from the trees. The foal shifted beside the stallion, and the rancher's pulse quickened. Nothing had prepared them for what the next moment would bring, and every second felt stretched, electric, alive. The morning ritual had become something far greater than anyone could have imagined, and the rancher knew they were standing on the edge of a revelation that would change the land, the horses, and their understanding of courage forever. The days that followed were tense, each sunrise heavier than the last. The wild stallion ran to the fence as always, but now the clearing held more than a foal and the distant shadow. The ranchers noticed subtle changes in the land, the soft indentations of hooves beyond the paddock, broken branches that weren't caused by wind, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush that hinted at someone or something moving just beyond sight. The rancher who had first noticed the morning ritual began pacing the fence line, his eyes scanning the hills, heart alert to the smallest signal. The stallion's vigilance never wavered, but the air was thick with the sense that a test loomed, one that neither human nor horse could ignore. The foal had grown stronger, its legs steadier, but it was still fragile. Every morning it followed the stallion's lead, learning to trust the instincts that had saved it over the previous weeks. The rancher realized that the bond between the two animals was deeper than mere protection. The stallion's actions were deliberate, almost tactical, anticipating threats long before they arrived. Observing them, the rancher could see the intelligence in the animal's eyes, the way it gauged distance and timing, teaching the foal more than survival, teaching it awareness. The foal's wobbling steps slowly became confident, and the rancher often wondered whether the foal's growth was as much physical as it was in spirit. Tension on the ranch grew as neighbors whispered of the mysterious shadow that lingered near the ridge. Some believed it was a man, others a thief testing the boundaries of the property. The rancher couldn't tell for certain, and the stallion's behavior suggested caution rather than fear. It never panicked, never fled. Its muscles remained coiled, ready to act, yet its gaze was always measured, assessing, strategic. One morning, the rancher noticed the foal stopping mid-step, ears flicking toward the ridge. The stallion circled protectively, nudging the young horse along, a silent reminder that they had survived this long together and could survive longer if they trusted each other. The humans on the ranch had to navigate their own fears as well. The rancher worried for the foal's safety, wondering if intervention was necessary. Yet every time he drew near, the stallion's gaze reminded him of its authority. He could sense that interfering recklessly might break the trust the foal had learned to rely on. The rancher began keeping a careful record of every morning's events, the time the stallion arrived, the foal's behavior, the movement of the shadow, the wind, the sounds across the hills. It was an attempt to understand what had grown into a story far larger than any of them could have imagined, a tale of instinct, courage, and the unknown. One evening, after weeks of careful observation, the shadow moved closer than ever before. The rancher, watching from behind a ridge, could see a figure crouched among the trees, deliberate and patient, assessing the clearing. The stallion's ears flattened, nostrils flaring. It pawed the ground, muscles coiled like springs ready to release. The foal shuffled nervously, seeking the reassurance of the stallion's presence. The rancher felt the tension tighten around him, a rope winding through the clearing, threading through the foal, the stallion, and the unseen observer. Every instinct screamed for action, yet he remained still, trusting the stallion to guide the foal through what was coming. Meanwhile, other ranch hands began reporting strange occurrences elsewhere on the property. Cattle had been spooked at odd hours, horses whinnied in the distance, and there were whispers of movement near the barns. Nothing was stolen or harmed, but the signs of intrusion were undeniable. The rancher started suspecting the shadow was more than curiosity. It was a calculated presence, watching, testing, probing for weakness. The stallion's unwavering attention to the foal became a lifeline. It wasn't just protecting the foal from physical danger. It was guarding against uncertainty, teaching the young horse to respond to the invisible threats in its world. The bond between human and horse deepened in subtle ways. The rancher began leaving small amounts of food near the clearing, careful to remain hidden, watching how the stallion allowed the foal to approach first. It was a test, a silent agreement, a communication across species. The foal learned to wait, to observe, to trust the guidance of its guardian. The rancher marveled at the intelligence displayed by both animals. There was strategy in every step, foresight in every glance, and a silent communication that seemed to transcend instinct. The shadow in the trees became secondary to the lesson the rancher learned from observing the horses. Patience, awareness, and trust were weapons as powerful as strength or speed. As the foal grew stronger, small moments of triumph emerged. It learned to dodge low branches, to avoid hidden roots, and to keep pace with the stallion across the fields. Each step forward was measured, deliberate, and watched by the rancher from a safe distance. He began to feel a sense of awe, even fear, at the lessons being taught by these animals. The stallion was more than a protector. It was a teacher, a mentor, a guide in survival. The foal's growth was not simply physical. It was becoming aware of the world's dangers and the strategies needed to navigate them. The rancher realized he was witnessing a rare story, one that went far beyond ranch life and ordinary observation. One morning, the shadow revealed a slight movement that caught the rancher's eye. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a hand brushing against a branch, a shadow shifting slightly. The stallion froze, ears twitching, muscles taut. The foal hesitated, sensing tension it could not fully understand. The rancher's pulse quickened. He knew that the next confrontation was approaching, though he could not yet predict its form or outcome. The stallion pawed the ground, stamping a warning that echoed across the clearing. It was a signal that whatever came next would be met with precision, strength, and unwavering courage. The subplot of the shadow deepened the tension on the ranch. Was it a thief, a rival, or some wanderer with intentions unknown? No one could tell. and yet the stallion's vigilance suggested it had encountered threats before, perhaps even in this same clearing or in past travels across the hills. The rancher thought about the stallion's history: strong, agile, intelligent, and wondered how much of its behavior was learned from instinct and how much from experience. Every action, every nudge to the foal, every tense stance near the ridge revealed a story untold. The rancher could only watch and interpret, knowing that the moment of confrontation was inevitable. The tension reached a new level when the foal began mimicking the stallion more precisely, stepping in rhythm with its movements, circling the clearing with a cautious confidence, and responding to subtle signals. The rancher realized that the foal's survival depended not only on physical growth, but on learning the language of trust and guidance from its guardian. The shadow, observing, seemed to test both animals simultaneously, pressing boundaries without making a move, as if aware that patience would yield more than aggression. The clearing had become a stage where instinct, intelligence, and observation collided, and the rancher knew that any misstep could unravel everything they had worked to protect. Evenings on the ranch became a mixture of tension and reflection. The rancher would stand near the barn, lantern in hand, thinking about the bond he had witnessed and the lessons he had learned. He considered the foal's vulnerability and the stallion's protective instinct. Every sound in the distance, every movement in the brush, reminded him that the shadow could strike at any time. Yet there was also a rhythm, a quiet order in the chaos. The horses had developed a silent system, one of communication and awareness that allowed them to anticipate danger, to survive, and to protect one another. The rancher realized that survival often depended on trust more than courage, and that the quiet guidance of a guardian could shape destiny in ways no one could foresee. Then, one morning, the shadow shifted closer than ever before. The stallion's stance stiffened, its hooves digging into the earth, muscles rippling like coiled steel. The foal froze, ears flat, tail swishing with nervous energy. The rancher held his breath behind the fence, heart hammering. The shadow was deliberate, patient, testing the animal's awareness. The stallion pawed the ground and let out a low whinny, a warning that carried across the clearing. The foal shivered, but it did not flee. Every step it had learned, every gesture of trust with the stallion, was about to be tested in full. The wind shifted again, carrying subtle scents from the trees, hints of movement, and the quiet pressure of the approaching presence. The stallion and foal moved as one, a team forged in trust and instinct. The rancher realized the climax of this ongoing conflict was drawing near, but he could not yet see the shape of it. The shadow could reveal itself at any moment, and the morning ritual that had once been peaceful had transformed into a test of strategy, courage, and the bonds that defined life on the range. And so, the clearing held its breath, the stallion's eyes locked on the ridge, the foal trembling but ready, and the rancher's heart tight with anticipation. Every sunrise, every run to the fence had led to this moment. The story of trust, survival, and the mystery beyond the trees was far from over, and the rancher knew that the answers, when they came, would change everything he thought he understood about life, courage, and the unspoken power of the wild. The morning was colder than usual, a thin frost coating the fence rails and the tips of the grass. The stallion appeared over the ridge, mane dark and flowing, muscles rippling under the early sun. Its hooves struck the ground with purpose, each step echoing across the quiet valley. The foal struggled to keep pace, wobbling but determined, guided by the stallion's steady rhythm. The rancher, standing just beyond the fence, felt his chest tighten. Today felt different. The shadow in the trees had shifted closer overnight, and the tension in the clearing was palpable. Every instinct in him screamed that something significant was about to happen, that the story they had watched unfold for weeks was nearing its turning point. The shadow moved again, deliberate and slow, testing the boundaries of the clearing. The stallion stopped mid-stride, ears pinned, nostrils flaring. The foal froze as well, trembling slightly, but it did not retreat. The rancher watched in awe as the two animals communicated in silence, a bond forged in weeks of routine and trust now put to its ultimate test. The stallion circled the foal, nudging it gently, urging it forward without panic, without rush. It was a lesson in courage, one the foal absorbed instinctively. The rancher felt the weight of every moment pressing down on him, knowing that whatever happened next would define the clearing, the horses, and everyone who had witnessed the ritual. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint rustle of leaves from the ridge. The shadow edged closer, revealing more of its shape, a human figure, cautious and deliberate, hiding behind the sparse trees. The rancher's pulse quickened. He could see the figure now, tall and thin, clothing blending with the brown and green of the hills. Its intentions were unclear, but the stallion knew. Its muscles tensed, hooves digging into the earth, nostrils flaring as it assessed the threat. The foal pressed closer, learning again that instinct and trust could carry it through moments of danger it could not yet comprehend. For hours, the clearing became a stage of silent confrontation. The shadow lingered, probing, testing, shifting from tree to tree with careful calculation. The stallion paced with purpose, each movement protective and precise. The foal moved in rhythm with its guardian, learning to read cues, to anticipate action, to understand that courage was not reckless but deliberate. The rancher, hidden behind the fence, felt a mixture of awe and anxiety. He realized he was witnessing more than survival. He was seeing strategy, awareness, and loyalty embodied in a way few humans could match. Throughout the day, other elements of the ranch played their parts. A stray breeze carried scents from the ridge, birds stirred nervously in the trees, and distant cattle shifted uneasily. Each sound added to the tension, feeding the stallion's vigilance and sharpening the foal's instincts. The rancher noted every detail, trying to understand the delicate balance that had been created in the clearing. He realized that the story was not just about protection, but about teaching, growth, and the subtle interplay between danger and trust. By midday, the foal had gained remarkable confidence. It no longer stumbled as often, and it began to anticipate the stallion's movements, stepping when guided, pausing when nudged, and reacting to distant sounds with careful observation. The rancher marveled at the transformation. The stallion had not just protected the foal, it had trained it, instilled in it the awareness and composure needed to survive challenges far greater than either of them could predict. The shadow, persistent and patient, continued to watch, pushing boundaries without revealing itself fully. Every glance, every shift, every whisper of movement was a test. The rancher considered intervening, but the stallion's demeanor warned him to stay back. It had become clear that human presence, however well-intentioned, might disrupt the delicate balance that had been established. The foal relied on the stallion anticipated danger, and the shadow observed both. The clearing had become a theater of instinct and strategy, each player testing the other while the rancher observed from the periphery. He realized that the true climax of the story was approaching, that the answers they sought were just out of reach, and that the lessons to be learned were far beyond simple survival. As the sun dipped toward the western hills, the shadow made a sudden movement, shifting slightly closer. The stallion froze instantly, ears back, nostrils flaring. The foal paused as well, recognizing the tension in its guardian. The rancher's hands tightened around the fence, heart racing with anticipation. The shadow's presence was deliberate, almost daring the stallion to act. The air seemed to thrum with expectation. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, every shift in the foal's stance contributed to the crescendo of tension that had been building for weeks. The stallion let out a low whinny, a warning that vibrated across the clearing. The foal shivered but did not run. It had learned to trust the guidance it had received, to respond to the subtle cues that ensured safety. The rancher, watching from the ridge, realized that this was the culmination of every lesson, every moment of observation, and every instinct sharpened by days of vigilance. The shadow remained still, careful, as if testing the limits of patience. It was a silent standoff, an unspoken negotiation of power and trust. As afternoon gave way to evening, the stallion's movements became sharper, more precise. It circled the foal protectively, nostrils flaring, eyes fixed on the ridge. The foal mirrored the motions with a tentative confidence, learning again that courage was measured, deliberate, and guided by trust. The rancher noted how the foal had grown, both in body and in spirit, and felt a quiet admiration for the intelligence and strategy displayed by the stallion. Each moment, each subtle gesture carried meaning. Every step toward the fence, every paw of the ground, every whinny was part of a language he could only begin to interpret. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field, the shadow made another shift, closer to the clearing. The stallion's muscles coiled, ready to act if necessary. The foal pressed against its side, seeking guidance and strength. The rancher felt a shiver of anticipation. The shadow's movements were deliberate, calculated, almost cautious, yet there was an air of inevitability. The moment of confrontation was near, but the rancher could not see what shape it would take. He only knew that the lesson the foal had learned, the guidance of the stallion, and the silent test of the shadow were all leading to a defining moment that would shape the clearing, the horses, and everyone watching. Then, in a sudden motion, the shadow shifted fully into view. The stallion stiffened, muscles taut, mane bristling like a dark flame. The foal trembled but did not flee. Every day of vigilance, every lesson learned, had prepared it for this moment. The rancher held his breath, aware that what would happen next would test the limits of trust, courage, and the bond between horse and foal. He could feel the anticipation stretching across the clearing, an invisible tension that connected every player in the scene. The shadow remained still, observing, almost as if measuring the stallion's patience, the foal's readiness, and the rancher's presence. The stallion's stance was unyielding, protective, and precise. The foal mirrored the movements, learning the silent language of survival and guidance. The rancher realized that the climax was approaching, and though the outcome remained unknown, the moment carried a quiet promise of resolution. Each heartbeat, each step, each glance was a piece of the story that would soon unfold. And as the sun touched the horizon, bathing the clearing in golden light, the rancher felt the weight of the moment, knowing that the days of observation, tension, and learning had led them to this point. The shadow, the stallion, the foal, and the clearing itself seemed to hold their collective breath, waiting for the next move. Every second was charged with possibility, suspense, and the quiet certainty that courage and trust would guide the next chapter in this unfolding story. The clearing held its breath as the shadow slowly stepped forward, revealing itself more clearly in the fading sunlight. The rancher's eyes widened in recognition. It was not a threat, nor a thief, nor a predator. It was a young rider, gaunt and cautious, clearly someone who had spent weeks observing the land from the hills. Relief and curiosity collided in the rancher's chest as he watched the rider approach carefully, keeping a respectful distance from the stallion and the foal. The wild horse's ears flicked toward the figure, tense but not aggressive, as if acknowledging a new presence without fear. The foal shivered slightly, but did not retreat, standing firm at the side of its guardian. The rider spoke in a low, calm voice, breaking the silence of the clearing. "I didn't mean to scare them," he said, eyes fixed on the stallion. "I've been watching, trying to see if they were safe." The stallion's muscles relaxed ever so slightly, though it remained alert, circling the foal with protective precision. The rancher stepped forward from behind the fence, hands raised in greeting. "It's all right," he said gently. "No harm's done." "But you've been keeping them on edge," the rider nodded, offering a faint, nervous smile. It became clear that the rider had once been part of a traveling herd, and circumstances had separated him from his own horse long ago. He had spent weeks observing the clearing from a distance, hoping to understand the wild horse's patterns and behavior. His respect for the animals was evident in every careful step, every quiet gesture. The stallion, it seemed, recognized the sincerity in his approach, acknowledging him without aggression but with cautious interest. The foal, too, sensed the absence of threat, nudging its guardian lightly before stepping closer to the new presence with tentative curiosity. The rancher, relieved, began to introduce himself properly. He spoke about the ranch, the daily routine, and the stallion's unusual bond with the foal. The rider listened carefully, eyes never leaving the horses, occasionally glancing at the ridge where he had hidden before. He admitted that he had wanted to ensure the foal's safety, having once known the heartbreak of losing a young horse to neglect and exposure. The rancher nodded, understanding immediately. They shared a quiet understanding that crossed words, a respect for the animal's instincts, for the land, and for the fragile moments that define survival. Over the following days, the tension in the clearing eased. The shadow no longer lingered at the edge of the trees, but instead became a part of the story. The writer worked carefully to gain the trust of the stallion, offering calm words, gentle gestures, and small tokens of food. The wild horse remained cautious, as always, but allowed the foal to approach the rider when it felt safe. The rancher observed the interactions with growing amazement. What had begun as a silent test of vigilance and courage had evolved into a mutual understanding between human and horse. The foal's confidence increased with each passing day, bolstered not only by the stallion's guidance, but also by the quiet respect of the rider. The rancher noticed subtle changes in the clearing itself. The foal grew stronger with every passing sunrise, legs steady, coat gleaming in the morning light. The stallion, too, seemed calmer, though no less vigilant, its eyes sharp and movements precise. The rider's presence introduced a new element of reassurance, a quiet partnership that allowed the animals to grow in trust and confidence. Together, the three formed a fragile but resilient balance, a testament to instinct, patience, and understanding. The rancher marveled at the lessons unfolding before him. Courage was not about reckless strength, but about measured action guided by trust and care. As weeks passed, the foal began exploring further from the stallion, testing its legs across the clearing, yet always returning to its guardian's side. The rider occasionally guided it gently, helping it navigate small obstacles and encouraging curiosity without pressure. The rancher documented every moment, noting the foal's physical growth and the development of its instincts. The clearing had become a classroom, and the lessons went beyond survival. They were lessons in trust, patience, and the power of bonds formed through respect and guidance rather than dominance. The community surrounding the ranch began to notice the transformation. Neighbors, once skeptical of the wild stallion's intentions, began visiting quietly, observing from a respectful distance. The story of the daily ritual, the bond between the stallion and foal, and the shadow that had revealed itself as a rider spread quietly but surely. People whispered about the intelligence of the wild horse, the foal's growing confidence, and the remarkable lessons the animals offered. Some brought small gifts, grain, water, or brushes, contributing to the clearing's sense of shared care without intruding on the animal's space. The rancher watched all of this with quiet pride, understanding that the story was no longer just his to observe. It had become a living narrative that touched everyone who came near, inspiring respect and wonder. One morning, as the sun rose golden and full over the hills, the stallion ran to the fence as usual. The foal followed confidently, muscles rippling, legs steady, mane flowing in the breeze. The rider stood nearby, calm, offering a quiet word of encouragement. The rancher watched from a short distance, knowing that the moment they had all waited for was arriving. The stallion approached the foal, nudging it gently, then stepped back, eyes scanning the horizon. The foal, sensing the guidance, stepped forward with determination. The clearing held a serene tension, the kind that precedes the realization of something long awaited. And then it happened. The foal, guided by the stallion's steady presence and encouraged by the rider's calm assurance, trotted across the clearing with newfound confidence. It paused briefly near the fence, ears flicking toward the observer, then continued with strength and poise. The stallion followed, circling protectively, then settled beside the foal, as if acknowledging the culmination of their journey together. The rancher felt a swell of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and awe. The foal had not just survived, it had thrived, shaped by instinct, trust, and the careful guidance of its guardian. The rider approached carefully, kneeling to offer a gentle touch to the foal's muzzle. The stallion lowered its head slightly, acknowledging the human without fear. The clearing was quiet except for the soft sound of hooves on grass and the occasional nicker, a language of reassurance and accomplishment. The rancher stepped forward, heart full, realizing that the tension, the suspense, and the weeks of observation had led to this moment. The foal's triumph, the stallion's steadfast guidance, and the quiet understanding that humans and horses could coexist with respect and patience. The ranchers, neighbors, and even the rider shared a moment of quiet reflection. The lessons of the clearing were clear. Patience and trust could overcome fear. Guidance could nurture confidence, and bonds formed through respect and care could transform lives. The foal had grown not just in strength but in spirit. The stallion had fulfilled its role as guardian and teacher, and the humans had witnessed a story that would remain with them forever. Every sunrise had led to this point, every challenge had been met, and the clearing was now a place of harmony and understanding. Weeks later, the foal ran freely across the fields, no longer trembling, no longer uncertain. The stallion followed with ease, eyes ever watchful, teaching the foal through motion and presence. The rider worked gently to maintain trust, never overstepping boundaries, and the rancher finally felt the weight of tension lift. The story that had begun with suspense, mystery, and danger now concluded in harmony. Every element, the wild instincts of the stallion, the vulnerability and growth of the foal, the careful observation of humans came together to form a narrative of triumph, courage, and the quiet power of guidance. The clearing had transformed into a sanctuary of understanding, a place where lessons of life, courage, and trust were taught without words. The rancher often watched the stallion and foal from the fence, marveling at their growth and the depth of their bond. The rider became a quiet partner, respected by the animals and welcomed by the rancher. Together, they had witnessed a story that would live in memory, a testament to the enduring power of instinct, patience, and the trust that could exist between humans and horses. And as the sun set over the hills, painting the clearing in golden light, the rancher realized the true gift of the wild stallion. It had not only protected a fragile foal, it had taught the humans who watched the value of patience, the power of instinct, and the enduring strength of bonds built on trust. The clearing, once tense and uncertain, now hummed with life and harmony. Every morning, every run to the fence, every careful glance and gesture had led to this happy ending. The story was complete, yet it would echo in memory for years to come, a quiet reminder that courage, guidance, and respect could transform the most fragile beginnings into triumphs beyond imagination.